Hello and welcome to the Wisepreneurs Podcast. My name is Nigel Rawlins and I work with a range of women who are professionals in their field. They're often 50 to 60 years old who want to start their own business. In this podcast, I'll be interviewing a range of guests who will be able to tell you how they've done it themselves, and others who will give you hints and ideas and tips and maybe the confidence you need to go out and start your own business. What do you do if you don't like your job? Have you thought about becoming your own boss? Is self-employment an option for you? And what would it take for you to consider this? In my second interview with Meredith Fuller, a career counsellor with over 30 years experience and a good friend, we discuss these issues and more. Welcome, Meredith. Thank you for joining me. What I wanted to talk with you about is the nature of work, careers, COVID and the gig economy in a sense, and see how all that comes together. But before we do that, what have you been up to?
This year, I've done a lot of work with organisations who have moved to working from home with their employees and doing some group Zooms to monitor them and care for their mental and emotional health while they traverse that shift. And also a lot of work on family tree, looking at our families of origin and looking at patterns and connecting that to things like personalities, love, meaning of life, things like that. So it's been quite a range of activity, but also a lot of opportunity to actually observe what's happening in society. Because we've all had that opportunity for reflection.
So what are the things that you're finding in your discussions or your assumed discussions with people who have to work at home? What's happening there?
Interestingly enough, I fear that if you allowed people to work from home, they would be less productive, they wouldn't produce as much work, they'd cheat you somehow. But the reverse is true. In fact, the problem is people working from home don't know when to stop, don't feel that they've done enough, and they're working excessive hours and at a high pace, and they're needing to learn a different way of monitoring how much they output and how they enable themselves to have a proper work-life balance.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because you know, you think when you're at work, well, one, you're going to travel to work, so that's time. So you leave the house, you travel to work, you get to work, you'll do some work, then you might have your breaks, you may have your meetings and things like that. Whereas if you're working from home, none of that's happening. But you've got other distractions at home too. I mean, are you finding that people at home are coping with family life, especially when, say, if they had children and they couldn't go to school because of COVID? How did that affect the people you were talking to?
Space is very important. If you have a small space with a lot of activity because there are a number of people trying to coexist in that space, it's more problematic. If you have a lot of space, it's been fine for people. Some people have decided that they'd set themselves up in their garage, for example, is where they work so that they can sequester off and then it's not a problem. Other people find that it also depends on your methods of communication and how well-mannered and respectful each person is of each other will impact on how that functions. So, again, I think it's quite idiosyncratic how that works.
Well, I had an interesting conversation with a lady the other day who has to work from home. I've had a conversation with a few people, actually, but this particular one worked in drug and alcohol rehabilitation. And it was her job to ring up people and talk to them. And she said to me, after she's spoken to some people, and it could be for a few hours, where does she get to talk to her colleagues anymore when she's working from home? And she's finding that really, really difficult. So I guess it depends on the sort of work they're doing. Any thoughts on that?
Well, not only the work, but what your personality structure's like. For some people, they do have a need to debrief and process. So there's that social aspect that's really important in how they cool down from what they've done and how they make sense of their process. For other people, there are other techniques they use and it's not as important. It also depends on, again, what you do with your space. Some people will understand that they have a need to debrief, and that's why in some professions it's part of your modus operandi. So say, for example, for psychologists, we all have regular supervision. We should do our own therapy or counselling, and whether that's group, collegial, or with a person who's been in the profession longer, it's something that we've always done. So it wouldn't occur to us not to debrief. Some people find that they understand why debrief's important and they'll factor that in. Gee, I know I've got a busy 3 days, so I'll book in 2 hours with a colleague. We work in different places, but we understand each other. We'll go for a nice long walk and we'll talk about our cases, and that's in the diary, and therefore if it's in the diary, I'll do it. Other people find they're working from home, they realise their head's full, they do need to talk to people, they turn around and say, well, there's no one here. Oh, well, I'll talk to the dog, I'll just get on with it. They don't actually care for their need, so it becomes a great sadness. Other people realise that there's other ways of managing, so they might do some reading or journal work or reflecting or get on and do some Zoom connecting with other people. So it depends very much, again, on how hungry are you for a thing, and then what's your behaviour in terms of how you get that need met, and whether you're stuck or fluid about what you do. So again, I come back to this thing about know yourself. The more you know yourself and what you need, the more you can set up what you need. And it's a little bit like the problem being, you know, with a lot of people, if they're sick and they need to take medication, they take the medication, they start to feel well, so they think, I don't need my medication, stop taking it, and then they get sick.
Yeah, so they go out of routine. So I guess what I'm thinking about with the nature of work, now that people can work from home, and it sounds like a lot of this is going to continue and maybe companies will change. In Melbourne CBD is fairly empty. Whether people go back to an office or not, or travel back into the city to work, there seems to be a shift where people are saying, well, I don't need to work in a job somewhere. I can do my work from home. What in terms of career, and the point I guess I'm trying to make here is, if you're unhappy with your job, but you like the idea of working from home, what happens to your career?
I guess you have to say, what is career? What's your purpose? What's your career? What's work? What's your sense of self, and how do you derive your sense of self is a good starting place when it comes to who you are. And then around that, it's almost like you can spin your web about, well, what does that mean for the work you do, or the people you do it with, or how you behave and how you act and how you function. And if you don't really understand that question, I think it's much harder to grasp the notion of what's the importance of what you contribute. So that would be my starting point for people.
So the issue there is, if you have something you feel strongly about that you'd like to contribute to help your society, and your job's not giving you that satisfaction, what do you do?
If, for example, you know it's about love, you know it's about relationship, and you will seek and live with the relationship connection that's meaningful. And it really isn't the case of, oh, it's the job. It's more about the relationship that I have with myself, with a significant other, with others, community, friends, family, work, whatever. It's not so important what the career is. It's more about the nature of how you're expressing the love. So that really drives your behaviour in a different way to, say, someone who is more concerned with my moral duty, that I'm here to make sure that the laws are followed and there's control over the chaos, and, you know, if my world doesn't make sense, that's terrible. I've got to make sure that I shape and form the rules of our society. So if I'm looking for some job that will enable me to do that, then I'll have to do that. For example, you'll find people who say, look, I hate my job because it doesn't help the climate. I hate my job because the values are wrong. It's criminal activity and it's illegal, so I can't keep doing it because it will destroy me. That would be a different meaning for why you'd have to flee to something that you're very strongly aligned to in terms of the world. So I think it's very much about, again, the type of person, how you'd answer that, because for quite a significant number of people, it's not really about the career or the job. It's more about how you live your life and what you need for that. For some people, it's with the freedom, it's I've got to move. I have to have agency over my own body and that sense of getting out and about when and how I wish. So it would kill me to go back to an office because I feel trapped. I'm chained to a desk. I can't just get up and wander when I feel like it and commune with nature. So for them, probably doesn't matter what they're doing outside as long as they can move. So I guess it's, and probably with the last one too, it's like, okay, I got stuck in a job and there's no stretch. There's no opportunity for me to understand principles. There's no opportunity for me to argue the toss with people. I'm doing mind-numbing work that is meaningless. And therefore, for me, most of my time, I have to turn my brain off. And therefore, that's the thing that will push me to say, I can't do this anymore. And that is a very interesting point, because one of the things that we're noticing, I believe, is that a lot of the work in the past 30, 40 years isn't really very intellectual. It's pretty repetitive, it's pretty silly, it's pretty boring, it's pretty useless. And we've all been seduced by job titles. And yet when you analyse what are people doing, it's like, well, I'll do a bit of work and the rest of the time I'm, entertaining myself on my social media.
And keeping busy.
I'm not using my mind to invent new things. It's like I'm not really exercising my thinking power. And so you can see why quite a number of people are saying, I hate my job, it's boring. I've got all these qualifications and you need all these qualifications to do the job, but I'm really not being extended every day. My mind isn't being stretched. It's sort of calcifying. And so for those people, it's, I can't keep going on like this because I'm like the walking dead. So you need to really understand what drives you the most to understand how you'd respond to that notion. Because for some people, they say, look, do you know what? The work or the career doesn't matter to me. It's about me living a true life, or me living a life that makes sense to me with my greatest needs being met. So, I'm happy to let go of my status. I'm happy to go and do something where I'll be inept or primitive because I don't care. Whereas for some other people, it's so dependent on how they're perceived externally. Do you know what? I'm bored. I hate my job. But the needs I get from having a job title is much greater than the need I have to really like what I do. So you really need to understand what are your triggers, I think, in order to deal with that, and not think that some people who are bored and don't like their work very much have to change. Because for some people, they say, do you know what? I don't mind being bored for so many hours a day if that means I can eat and fund a particular interest or passion I have. Doesn't bother me. It just depends on the individual.
I think that's the secret of it in a way, is to, I guess, understand if you've got a feeling inside that's telling you something, or your intuition's bubbling up, something is wrong. It would indicate to you that you need to explore what's going on there. And the other interesting thing there too is the idea of a job. I see a job as something you just do for money. It might be a temp job, it might be a part-time job, or it might be a full-time job. There's a career, where you've got some sort of progression. And many years ago I was a teacher and I progressed through that and then didn't like it when I got there and quit. And then there's callings, something that, you know, you love, but that calling might only be part-time. You might be able to do a few things, that whole idea of the portfolio career. I guess one of the issues is if you're feeling that inside and you're starting to explore that and it's COVID and you're worried about getting another job or you're worried about your future, what do you do? Do you just put up with it or do you start shifting?
First of all, understand what your great need is. And if your great need is to be part of a social community and to have relationship with a group of people, you might say, the actual work is really dreary and dull. The content is dull. But the process of being with a group of people and we can all laugh and giggle and connect with each other and be kind of agent provocateurs, that's more important. So I don't want to give that up. And I could go and do some other thing that, you know, was really my thing, but I would miss that collegiality. So I don't mind doing something that's a bit mind-numbing because there's a secondary gain I get. So do you know what? I'll just put up with it because being part of that social community and having the honour of contributing to the social norms is far more important. So you know what? I'll put up with it. Other people might say, how many hours a day do you need satisfaction versus just doing what you have to do to survive? So for some people, they might say, well, look, do you know what? I want to be fully engaged and stretched every single day. Well, it's kind of not realistic.
No.
We actually need to ebb and flow. Sometimes we understand that the greatest ideas can come when you're in a state of reverie, like relaxed alertness. Now, if you were being pushed and stretched every minute of every day, that becomes draining and stressful and tiring and exhausting and you shut down and you're not having your great ideas. So you realise, oh, hang on, I need to do some of this boring stuff to give me the peaks and troughs. Other people might say, I'm really having an existential crisis. It's not really about calling career or work. It's the fact that my age, my decade and what I need to express and do is really significant to me and I need to explore what that is and it transcends the idea of jobs, work, whatever. Other people might say, do you know what? My need for sensory comfort is very high. I'm very aesthetic. I like nice food. I like to have nice things to wear and I like a nice house and I want to have a sense of luxury. Well, I understand if I give up doing something I'm not very fussed about, I have to give up a whole lot of things that are important to me. And you know what? I don't want to go and live in the wilds of Tasmania and live in the middle of nowhere in a hut, even though that might sound very appealing. I don't want to let go of certain things. So do you know what? I'll just wait and put up with it. Other people might say, calling and meaning in my soul is so important to me. I'm not prepared to tolerate something that's inauthentic, where I don't fit, I don't belong, I can't stay here because it's killing me. I must pursue what I'm here on the planet for. I've got to find my purpose. I've got to live a life that has great meaning. And they're the people who can say, I can't do this anymore. I have to go and explore. And I'm prepared to give away my status, what I'm called. I'm prepared to downsize. I'm prepared to learn other skills, which means I can live far more cheaply. It just depends, I think, very much on, again, this sense of what's critical, connected to what your circumstances are. Some of us have responsibilities for children, and it's not just about me and how I feel about my work. It's also the fact that I have brought life into this world and I am actually responsible for keeping that being alive with food. And so I have to monitor that. Or I've made a pact with a partner and that partner's very ill and it isn't the right time for me to go off and find myself and restudy and do things. I've got a responsibility, so I might need to wait. And I guess the question is about waiting. how long can you delay your gratification for? And again, that can be a factor of what's your age and what's your time. I mean, obviously, if I'm 60 and I have a great need to let go of things that I hate and I need to do something important for me, and I realise, well, I can't be waiting 20 years before I start that, I'll be dead. It's more urgent. Whereas someone who's, say, 22 might say, do you know what? If I go like the clappers for a few years, doing something I'm not very fussed about, and prepare myself for a shift in my 30s or 40s, I can fit everything in. So I think it's not only your internal self, it's what your other responsibilities are. And it's also your delayed gratification quotient. And the other thing too is impatience. Some people are really wanting to do something else, but they're so impatient. I don't want to study. I don't want to apprentice myself to a wise soul and learn more. I don't want to let go of being competent and being respected, so I'm being a neophyte. I want to suddenly shift from what I'm currently doing to some other job or career where I'm competent, I'm respected, I'm valued, I earn money, I do what I think is important, and I'm not prepared to wait years for that to happen. So, no, forget it, I'll just whinge. So it's all those factors. And I think what happens is people like to think there's a formula and you say, oh, well, you do A, B, C, D, E. But it's so dependent on an individual. And that's what we're finding with the question of COVID you asked about, well, what's been like this year? For some people, they've absolutely flourished, and for other people, they've hated it. Some people are prepared to say, I can let go, I can surrender, and I'm prepared to try other things and find what sits well. Or it's all too hard. It's just easier for me to make myself spend a number of hours a day doing something that's pretty tedious because I just don't have the interest in what I'd have to do to shift that. And so be it. So it's always this thing about how much you understand yourself. And if you can't reflect on who you are, I think it's very difficult to really examine this idea of, do I change my work? Do I let go? Do I start something else? How do I work out what I'll be?
So in a sense, what you're saying is, if you're feeling that things aren't quite right with your work, it's worth exploring yourself and finding out more about that. Well, what about the person who is 60 and says, look, it's time to do something? What are some of the steps they can take to find out what they can do? And I'm thinking about maybe working from home, working for themselves, self-employment, getting into the gig economy, doing gigs, you could say. I mean, one of the people we know quite well is doing that quite well, but she's in a fairly good financial position to be able to do that. So what are some of the things, maybe the 60-year-old who says, this job is killing me, I've got to get out? What practical steps do you think they could do now, or a couple of things they could start doing? They probably explored themselves. They know they can't keep doing that. What do they have to do, or what do they need to make that shift? Say the gig economy or working for themselves and just getting out of that job.
First question is, can you work for yourself? Can you generate material for yourself? Can you get out of bed and create your day? Can you have the initiative to learn what you don't know, to do some boring bits of starting things up, to have a different lifestyle in terms of when you get paid, how much money you earn, everything? And the truth is, not everyone's suited to working for themselves and not everyone's suited to working from home. But the people who are usually have these little traits in common. They usually didn't like school, so primary and secondary school was absolutely boring for them, or tedious, or frustrating, or stressful, or torture. So the self-employed, work from home, create their own thing, never really found primary and secondary school amazing. It was dreadful for them. And yet if you talk to maybe 70% of the population, gee, they were the best years of their lives. And they really needed that structure around them and sense of how the things would unfold each day, because without the structure, they'd fall into chaos. So I always ask people, if you're thinking of, will I work from home? Do I want to create my own work? Could I be self-employed? Could I be entrepreneurial? Could I juggle several jobs? Could I find something I can do that someone wants to pay me for? Go back and think about your primary and secondary school experiences. That's fundamental. The second one is ask about your health. I'm 60. I am asking myself, can I work from home? Can I do my own thing? What is the level of my health? Am I well enough to manage X number of years doing A, B, C, D, E? Or do I find, my goodness, if someone isn't paying me for sickness, when I have to go to hospital, holidays, I'm not going to make it. I'm not very robust. Gee, I've only got a couple of hours a day where I can function. I can really just cruise along with other people handing me work and telling me what to do when I'm sort of a bit low-key. But, gee, if I had to actually be responsible for myself, I haven't got the chops for that. So you have to understand about your health and your robustness. So your rigour, your vitality, that's another factor. Another factor is how interested you are. Now, you don't have to be passionate, but you've got to be interested enough to stick at it. What's your stickability? So a lot of people say, oh, I'd love to do what you all do. You all work for yourselves. Oh, wouldn't that be great? I'd love that. And then when you explain what it means, they go, oh, yeah, I kind of want to do that. Oh, you mean I've got to get up and go and buy all the stationery if I run out of a pencil? Or, oh, I've got to do my own banking. Or, oh, I've got to do all my admin. Or, oh, I've got to go and find work and prostrate myself at the feet of others who will deign to pay me or not. Oh, no, no, that's too much. I don't want to do that. I just want to be a great thinker who just people sit at my feet and pay me for ideas, but I don't want to go and find them, and I don't want to keep updating my ideas. So I'll give you an example of what I mean by that, Nigel. If we can look at you. You're a person who reads voraciously. You are always at the cutting edge of thought. But that's got a cost. You spend a lot of time scanning, scouring, pushing yourself, being so widely and broadly read, talking to lots of people. You actively pursue your curiosity. Now, if you didn't do that, how could people say, you can do all the things you can do seriously? You wouldn't have the chops. So you have to look at your behaviour, because your behaviour is often evidence of your future behaviour. When people talk about job interviews and, they hate those behavioural interviews where they're always asking about, but what have you done? What have you achieved? How did you do it? Past behaviour is a good predictor of future behaviour, assuming you have wellness, assuming you have access to resources, etc., and assuming you have the right environment for yourself, which goes back to what I said earlier about what turns you on, what is your basic need. So we also have to ask people who say they want to work for themselves, or they want to be an entrepreneur, or they want to be a person who can just work from home. Well, where in your life have you ever demonstrated that? Where in your life have you ever had an idea or conveyed some knowledge of something to someone? Like, everyone wants to be a consultant. Well, if you can't problem identify, problem brainstorm, generate possibilities, communicate well with people, who's going to want you as a consultant? So you've got to think about your past behaviour. So you might say, and I think this is an important one for a lot of women. A lot of women have been working damn hard all their lives, but it hasn't been paid work. They might be raising family. They might be providing a good home environment for certain members of the family. They're contributing, but it hadn't been necessarily paid. But in their roles, they've done extraordinary skilled work. They need to ask themselves, well, of all the things I did to make X successful, can I break that down into what did that mean? A lot of women I notice who have been incredible homemakers are very good at juggling things simultaneously, and they just think, well, doesn't everyone do that? Or they're good at finding resources. Well, can't everyone research that? Or they don't realise that they have got a lot of skill, or that they're very persuasive. They manage to get children who don't want to get out of bed to school. They manage to get all sorts of things happening. So it's thinking more again about what are your processes that you've already been using, and then it's saying, well, here's my pattern. What's another way I can turn that pattern over and use it somewhere else? So to my mind, it goes with asking, where do I most flourish and what's easy for me to do but still stretches me? So, for example, I can tell you a story about a young guy who's in his late 20s, and he's a person who isn't robust. So he's had a lot of jobs, a bit of this, a bit of that, plants trees, does admin, does all sorts of things. But, look, I can't work more than 2 days a week. I get tired. And so he always has a series of part-time jobs, and then, it's boring and I'm tired and, I don't want to do that anymore. And the stickability isn't there for, well, what would you like to go and study? Oh, I'm bored. I don't like to study. I just figure it, no, I don't want to study. So he might start a number of courses, but he never finishes them. And you ask that person to do an analysis of his skills, his interests, his ability, his personality, all sorts of things. He goes, I don't know. You ask that person, well, what is it you want to do? I want to be a great leader, and people come and pay me for telling them what to do. That's what I want to do. And what are you talking about? Oh, and what makes you believe that someone would want to have that conversation with you? Oh, I just think I'm great. So you can see that it doesn't kind of fit with what we're talking about. But someone else can say, do you know what? Since I was a kid, I always had several jobs. I always managed things at home with my family. I was the one who advocated for things. I did this, I did that. I've always juggled certain things, and I always saw the world very differently. And when I do something well, that's not enough for me. I want to learn more about it. I want to pull it apart. I want to do it even better. Whatever it is, they've actually shown they've got tremendous vitality for trying things, playing things, doing things, that stickability. And, if I'm 60 and I want to do something new, well, gee, when I look at it, I've done that all my life. Every 5 or 6 years I change. I do something else. Well, okay, I'll play with these notions of what's around, what sticks to me. I'll give it a go. I'll hang around. I'll notice things. I'll go and talk to people. I'll observe things. This is, again, another question, as well as saying, what do I want to get out of bed for? I'm lying in bed in the morning. I open my eyes. There's the day. I could do anything with that day. What do I want to get out of bed for? Now, a lot of people will say, I don't have to go to work. I could do what I like. I don't feel like getting up. I think I'll just have a longer snooze, and, I can't be bothered. I like to have a long breakfast. Look, I think I'll just mooch around the house. Who cares? With someone else will say, you know what? If I could jump out of bed and do anything I liked, I want to go to a place I've never been before, and I want to learn about a culture. I want to, and they'd actually jump out of bed to pursue something because they feel and think that that would be intriguing, and it makes them leap out. And so I think the test is saying, if you could get out of bed today when you're feeling a bit lousy, you don't have to get out of bed, would you? And what would you be doing? And that is another critical question. And for a lot of people in their 60s, you might say, well, what is it? And they might say, I just want some peace and rest. Do you know what? I'm going to reconfigure all my finances so I don't need to earn as much money. I'm going to find a simpler lifestyle, and I'm going to just maybe do a few intriguing little work jobs that I've never done before, just to get a little bit of cash, just to play, and I'll just find out what is out there. Do you know what? I can earn a really good living running around putting pamphlets in a letterbox. Right. Walking, nice. It's that capacity to say I can reconstruct my lifestyle and I can do things differently and I can just play and see what happens. Another person who's 60 might say, God, I don't know what I'd get out of bed for. I only know that I feel like I'm dead. I better do something. Do you know what? I'm just going to do things for fun. I'm going to do short courses. I'm going to see if I can just ask my friends if I can come and go to work with them and just see what they do. I'm just going to do stuff, play, and just see if there's anything that turns me on, because I don't know yet. Now, I'm saying these things because we all know you can be 60 and be brilliant, and you can apply for a job and people can say, you're overqualified, you're too old, I don't want you, and that's not going to get you anywhere. So it's more about being able to say, I need to pursue something and then I need to find some form of credibility, and that can be becoming known for being good at something. And that's why I've always been a big advocate for volunteer work, getting on committees, coming up with a scheme and doing something that helps the community, or I do it but I don't get paid, because you're actually honing the skill, but you're also demonstrating that behavioural capacity, and you're getting noticed, and it's worthwhile for you, because when someone then says, oh, why are you applying for this? You can say, well, I've been doing it for 6 years. Look, it helps the yes buts for them. So I think that's really important as well. And so if I'm 60, I need to say to myself, well, do you know what? I might be still working when I'm 70, 80, 85, 90. I know people are still working at 90. If I've got 20 or 30 years, I can go and do some study. I can go and pursue having a mentor and being an apprentice. I can go and start from the bottom and work my way up, because I've got plenty of time, rather than, oh, what's the point of bothering? I can't start again. It's how you perceive, but you can't answer that unless you know what's your health like, how much do you need to live, how much do you need to earn, and what world are you in at the moment? Like, what goes around comes around. Often you find it's about timing. So many people were told, oh, don't do that career, there's no work for you. And then 15 years later, there's a great shortage for that work, if only they'd followed their passion, So I think you have to say, I don't need 10,000 jobs, I just need one person to give me a go doing something I really love, and I won't expect to get paid a lot of money for me to learn how to do it. I'll take self-responsibility for that, and I can do that because I know I'll be working at least so many years in the future. So it's never too late. I think that thing about it's never too late is a really important thing for the 60-year-old.
I think that's perfect. I mean, I think a lot of us will be working till we're 80, depending on the work we've been doing in the past. I can't see a lot of, say, bricklayers or concreters working till 80, but maybe the professional could be working to the 80 or even 90, provided it's something they love. Is there anything else you'd like to mention, Meredith?
Some people need support and help. So something's not right. You've been entrenched. You can't do that work anymore. Circumstances have changed. You would like to make a shift, but you are locked in financially to earning a certain income because of responsibilities and the context you're living in, and you don't know enough about what's out there, and you're so busy juggling your lifestyle you can't find out. Go and ask someone who works in this field. Don't be afraid to say, I've got to put my hand up and get some help. And that's really important, because sometimes other people can see things in us we can't see in ourselves, or they can help us on that journey of discovery, and they can also help assess your risk factor, and they can also help you to work out, well, what would be a good fit. And I think that's the key. It's being able to say, oh, I need to ponder this, and I can do that using other people's resources, or seeing individuals, go with a group, create my own exploring group with a lot of friends who are dissatisfied. There's many ways of getting support, but you have to be able to ask the question.
I think that's perfect. I guess the exploration is exploring what questions you want to find out an answer for. All right. Well, thank you, Meredith. Meredith, you've got a website that people can find you on. I'll put that in our show notes. Thank you very much, Meredith, for joining me today.
Thanks.